This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
Thank you for coming this afternoon. My name is Paula Varsano, and I'm a professor of East Asian Languages and Cultures and the chair of the Forster Committee, the Forster Lectures Committee. We, along with the Graduate Council, are very, very happy to present V.S. Ramachandran, this year's speaker in the Forster Lecture Series. I'm also very pleased to tell you a bit about how the endowment supporting the Forster Lectures on the Immortality of the Soul came to UC Berkeley. It's actually a story that really exemplifies the ways in which this campus is linked to the history of California and in particular to the Bay Area. In 1928, Miss Edith Zweibrück established the Forster Lectureship to honor the memory of Agnes A. Forster and her husband, Constantine E. Forster. Edith was a public school teacher for many years in San Francisco, and the teaching profession, in her eyes, was the perfect opportunity to develop a true knowledge and love of the spiritual values of life in the young minds entrusted to her care. Edith's beloved sister, Agnes A. Forster, shared her high ideals and her hopes, as did Agnes's husband, Constantine. A lawyer by profession, he was a man of high intellectual achievement and of rare personal charm. Although he passed away at the age of 37, he had achieved an enviable place at the San Francisco bar as one of its most highly respected members. For several years prior to his death, Forster was a law partner of none other than Alexander F. Morrison, one of the most prominent of San Francisco attorneys for whom our Morrison Memorial Library is named. In her last days, Miss Edith Zweibrück expressed her deep and abiding interest in the spiritual life by creating this lecture series on the subject of the immortality of the soul. She believed that through the medium of great universities and the words of scholarly lecturers, she might shed new light upon a subject that has interested the world for centuries. So we have to thank Edith Zweibrück. And now about our lecturer. Sometimes the best way to characterize a person is to consider what kinds of questions he or she likes to ask. And here's a question that is always being asked in various ways by our speaker. And I quote him here: "How can a 3-pound mass of jelly that you can hold in the palm of your hand imagine angels, contemplate the meaning of infinity, and even question its own place in the cosmos?" Now, what kind of person can ask this question in a way that doesn't sound rhetorical? Poets can do that. And Dr. V.S. Ramachandran is indeed a poet of sorts. Officially, however, he serves as the director of the Center for Brain and Cognition and is a distinguished professor at the University of California, San Diego, as well as an adjunct professor of biology at the Salk Institute. He has also been called the Marco Polo of neuroscience by Richard Dawkins and the modern Paul Broca by Eric Kandel. But as pithily impressive as these titles and these epithets may be, they actually do very, very little to reveal the mind-teasing pathway he has followed and on which he leads us in the work that he does and in the contributions that he makes. Dr. Ramachandran is renowned for his ongoing inquiry into the field of cognitive neuroscience, that is, the intersection of neurology and perceptual psychology. To steal a few words from the title of one of his books, he is actually a neuroscientist on a quest for what makes us human. Building on his early work on visual perception, Ramachandran has led pioneering experiments in behavioral neurology, taking cues from malfunctions in perception, including phantom limbs, synesthesia, and xenomelia, to delve into the unique ways in which the human brain forms and deforms the workings of mind. Lay people are perhaps most familiar with his controversial assertion of mirror neurons as playing a central role in the unique evolution of humans. His approach to neurology has been to revisit classic syndromes, bring them to the lab, determine their broader significance, and devise new treatments where possible. Of course, Ramachandran, many of you know, is a very prolific author, and he's published over 180 papers in scientific journals, 5 of which were invited review articles for Scientific American. He's the co-author with Sandra Blakesley of Phantoms in the Brain, 1999, which has been translated into 9 languages and formed the basis for a PBS special. His BBC Wreath lectures were published in 2003 in a volume titled The Emerging Mind, and were dubbed by the Nobel laureate David Hubel as bold, irreverent, original, and ingenious. His latest book, a New York Times bestseller, is The Telltale Brain. After training as a physician in Stanley Medical College in Madras, India, Ramachandran obtained a PhD from Trinity College and the University of Cambridge. He's an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, London, and the recipient of 2 honorary doctorates. Ramachandran has received many accolades throughout his career. He was awarded the Henry Dale Medal in 2005 and was elected to an honorary life membership to the Royal Institution of Great Britain. The President of India conferred on him the highest honorific title in India, Padma Bhushan, in 2007. And besides the BBC Wreath lectures he delivered in the UK, he also gave the Gifford Lectures in Scotland. Time magazine named him one of the most influential people in the world in their 2011 Time 100. Finally, before I cede the stage to Dr. Ramachandran, I would like to leave you with a few words by Ted Kooser, U.S. Poet Laureate from 2004 to 2006, who also asks, what makes us human? He words it differently, though, and much more mournfully than our speaker does. Here we will not find the mind's brain imagining angels or contemplating the meaning of infinity. In the closing lines of Kooser's poem, In the Hall of Bones, after cataloging the array of skeletons that he found in what seems to be a natural history museum, he writes these words. And then here's man, all matchsticks, wooden spoons, and tongue depressors wired together, a rack supporting a leaky jug of lust and worry. Of all the skeletons assembled here, this is the only one in which once throbbed a heart made sad by brooding on its shadow. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Ramachandran to Berkeley.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. I'm delighted to be here and honored to be invited by the committee to give this lecture, Foster lecture. And when the committee first phoned me up about this and said how to talk about the soul, immortality of the soul, I said, well, that's easy. I'd be happy to do it. And then I did a double take and I realized what I was getting into. But then fortunately they reassured me that in fact it doesn't have to be anything directly related to the soul, but so long as it's tangentially relevant, which means essentially all phenomena in the universe. So I'm going to approach the problem of soul, not so much the soul, but the self. It's after all the immortality of the self that we're all concerned about. We call it the soul. And I'm going to use 2 approaches, mainly one approach, but I'm not going to deal with the metaphysical question of soul, which is extensively dealt with in Indian philosophy and in Western philosophy as well. But if you sort of pause and introspect on the self, there are many attributes. It's kind of common sense, but roughly speaking, there's embodiment. One of the most obvious aspects of the self is you're anchored in one body. I'm not anchored in Charlie's body. I'm right here. But we'll call that into question in a minute. Then there's a sense of continuity in space and time. We all have a calendar. A sense of agency, sometimes called free will. Sense of unity and coherence, despite a diversity of sense impressions and memories over a lifetime. You feel like one person. I'm one guy, one name, one bank account, one spouse, so on and so forth. Then the sense of privacy and individuality. And then finally, most mysterious of all, self-awareness. Self that is not aware of itself is almost like an oxymoron. So there's curious recursive quality to it, which is hard to come to grips with. I'm not going to talk about all these attributes of the self. It'll take a whole week. But let's talk about embodiment and partly about privacy. And from the point of view of cognitive neuroscience and neurology. And the way we deal with this, the way we study this is by looking at patients. We can do brain imaging, it's one thing we do, but mainly we do behavioral, old-fashioned 19th century behavioral neurology. And look at patients who have sustained an injury or a change in a small part of the brain, and then producing characteristic changes in their behavior, and trying to correlate structure and function, trying to explain the changes in behavior in terms of the anatomical organization of the normal human brain. This gives you some insight into the question of what's mediating that particular function. So let me begin with a bang and talk about a syndrome which few people even heard of. It's called xenomelia. Xenomelia is the name we gave it, but it's also known as apotomnophilia, unpronounceable name, apotomnophilia. These refers to patients. I'll mention one example, striking example, of a dean of an engineering school who came to see me at the age of 70. He had just retired. He was 70 years old. And he had harbored through his entire life, he had harbored a secret urge, as he described it, to amputate his own healthy arm, going back as far back in childhood as he can remember. He's a perfectly normal guy in every respect, not obviously psychotic or depressed or mentally disturbed, no neurological findings, completely normal, led a normal family life, had friends, had a job, was a dean. Everything seemed normal, except for this one peculiarity that he had this urge. And by the way, then I discovered that many of these people, it's not that rare, it is rare, but it's not that rare. And about 1/3 of them to half of them go and get it amputated. So it's not some mild obsession which these people have. It has serious clinical consequences, the loss of a limb. So then I said, why do you come to see me? Do you want us to treat you or cure you? He said, no, I enjoy it. I don't want it to be cured. I want you to remove the arm. Give me a letter so I can go get it removed. And I can't do it here in this country. I can go to Mexico across the border. It's illegal to get a healthy limb amputated. I'm not making this up, is what he said. Later I checked on this, and it's true, you can get it amputated in Mexico and in Canada, but you can't do it here. So many patients travel north or south to get it amputated. And what would cause this? The first thing I asked him was, one of the things you learn in clinical medicine is first talk to the guy. 90% of the time you can figure out what's going on in his brain by just talking to him. You don't need to do brain imaging, you don't need to do even clinical testing. I said, what's going on? You feel like this arm doesn't belong to you? He said, no, it's the opposite. It feels like it over belongs to me. It's intrusive. It's intruding itself on me. And I want it removed, right? And I said, okay. And I started thinking about this, and I said, well, maybe what's gone wrong is if you look at the surface of the brain, that's the somatosensory cortex, or S1. It's got the Penfield map of the body surface. The entire surface of the body skin surface is mapped onto the postcentral. There's a vertical cleft going down the side of the brain called the central sulcus. Behind that cleft, there's a vertical strip of cortex, is shown in brown there. So that'd be the left hemisphere. If you're going to touch my right side, it goes to the postcentral gyrus in my left hemisphere. There's a complete map of the body surface on that postcentral gyrus there. That map is shown in the next slide. And many of you may have seen this before. It's got some peculiar features which I'll come back to. But I said, well, maybe in this guy, it's a very naive phrenological hunch. Maybe in this guy, that part of the brain is missing. The hand is not there. We don't know how much of this map is present, the scaffolding is present at birth, and how much of it is shaped by experience. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But for now, let's assume it's hardwired partly. Maybe it's congenitally missing the arm, and therefore he feels it's alien or it doesn't belong to him. So we did the obvious experiment of galvanic skin response, poked him with a needle gently at different parts of the body, and obtained electrical skin conductance responses. And we thought we would find no responses. So one of the things that clued us in to this as being a neurological rather than a psychological disorder, if you ask him where do you want it amputated, he'll take a felt pen and he'll draw an exact line just above the elbow or below the elbow or just above the hand. Very precise line, often an irregular line, sloping line. And then you let him go home. Don't tell him you're going to retest him, but bring him back after 6 months. He'll draw exactly the same line. Unless he's being deliberately deceptive, gone and memorized it, it's very unlikely he's doing this. So this suggests that why would the precise line matter? With some vague inclination to get the arm removed, why would the precise line matter? In fact, there are many psychological theories of this. One psychiatric theory holds that it's a cry for attention. That's why they want their arm removed. But why arm? And why not remove the nose or the ear or something like that? Why the arm always, or the leg, right? Seems pretty drastic way of getting attention. Another theory, believe it or not, is a Freudian theory. The guy wants his arm removed in order to create an amputation stump that resembles a giant penis. I'm not making this up. You can see this in the literature. So we thought we'd come up with a neurological, phrenological theory of what's going on. But then we drew the line with the felt tip, poked him with a needle on different parts of the body, to see if the galvanic skin response was normal below the line as opposed to above the line. We expected diminished galvanic skin response below the line because that part of the arm is not represented in the brain, according to our theory. Well, we found the opposite, as often happens in science. We found below the line there's a huge galvanic skin response. Above the line is perfectly normal, as you would expect. Is that clear? Okay, if you poke somebody with a needle, the message goes to S1, of course, and S2, the somatic representation of the body, but also goes to an area called the insular cortex. And from there, it gets sent to the anterior cingulate. And from that, messages cascade down the sympathetic nervous system, producing sympathetic arousal to the pain. And then this manifests as a change in sweating of the skin, which in turn can be measured as a change in skin resistance. You put 2 electrodes in the palm. When I scare you with a needle or scare you with a lion, you start sweating. And this registers as a fall in the skin resistance. It's the basis of lie detecting tests. Any anxiety, any panic would register this. So clearly, he was registering a higher response to the alienated part of the limb than to the normal part, which is the opposite of what we predicted. But hang on a second. So we said, well, our basic early theory was wrong, so what's going on here? So then we resorted to brain imaging. I don't have any pictures to show you, but basically what we found was this map was normal, and S1, the one I just showed you, S1 map is normal. S2, which represents joints, muscles, and light touch, that was also normal. So we said, what's going on here? Everything's normal. Then we went to the superior parietal lobule, SPL, over there where 4 is. Superior parietal lobule is where you create a polysensory representation of your body image. You close your eyes, you get a vivid impression of your own body, inhabiting your own body, your movements of your arms and legs and all that. And that sense is called body image by Henry Head and Lord Russell Brain, 2 real neurologists, by the way, who call this the body image. And that combined sensations from hearing, touch, and vision is in the superior parietal lobule. In that map, there is no response from the hand. So that map was abnormal. There's a hole, to put it crudely, corresponding to the hand he wanted amputated. So what's going on in this patient is the messages from the hand and arm are reaching the somatosensory cortex completely normal. So the messages, sensory signals are normal, sensory cortex is normal, S2 is normal, but they have nowhere to go to because there's a hole in that region of the brain. So this creates an abhorrence, a discrepancy between the incoming sensory input and no place for them to go to, and the brain abhors discrepancy. That signal goes to the insula and possibly the amygdala, generating a galvanic skin response, saying, "Eh," right? So here we have an example of it. We've taken the Freudian theory and discarded it. By and large, it may not be completely wrong. And then replaced it with an anatomical theory, which we can test in a few hours using a GSR machine, and then do more sophisticated brain imaging and show that we're on the right track. This shows the power of this approach, cognitive neuroscience, where you can take a bizarre, seemingly incomprehensible neurological disorder, a person wanting his arm removed, and reject the traditional explanation in favor of an anatomical explanation based on the known neuroanatomy of the sensory pathways in the brain. Now, can you cure the disorder? We haven't found a way of treating it yet. In fact, they don't want to be cured, as I said before. But the next topic I'm going to deal with, so this is It's typical of what we do. We take syndromes that have been known for a long time, either rare ones or common ones, like synesthesia is very common. I'm going to talk about that later today. Phantom limbs are quite common. I'll talk about that as well, or rare ones. Then bring them from the clinic to the laboratory, and then do systematic experiments to find out what's going on, and sometimes you're actually able to help the patient. Now, the strategy doesn't always work, looking for anomalies. Because every now and then, you only hear of the success stories. 9 out of 10 times it's a wild goose chase. Anomalies in neurology. The neurology and psychiatry are full of anomalous syndromes. 9 out of 10 times a wild goose chase. You only hear of the success stories. I'll give you 3 examples of wild goose chases, very briefly. There's a syndrome called Duclarenbold syndrome. How many of you know about Duclarenbold syndrome? Nobody, see? Pretty obscure. Even most psychiatrists haven't heard of it. It refers to, the syndrome is defined as, it's accepted in psychiatry textbooks, a young woman, typically a young woman, who develops the delusion that an old, rich, famous man is madly in love with her but is in denial about it. Now, funnily enough, the converse of this syndrome has not been described, where an older gentleman develops a delusion that a young hottie is sexually interested in him, but is in denial about it. And this is much more common, I can assure you. Another bogus syndrome is chronic underachievement syndrome. It's actually found in textbooks, chronic underachievement syndrome. In my day, it used to be called stupidity. And the third syndrome, my favorite, is oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. Now, this is a young, spirited youngster daring to challenge the establishment, challenge the diagnosis of the psychiatrist, challenge the parent. Right? The man who invented this syndrome is a genius, because any attempt by the patient to disprove the syndrome, to protect the syndrome, can be construed as additional evidence for the diagnosis. So anyway, leaving that aside, every now and then you stumble on legitimate syndromes. We give you key insights. So for example, apotomnophilia. Now I'm going to talk about something else. This you've heard before, many of you, but I'm going to repeat it, just the gist of it. Phantom limbs. An arm or leg is amputated. You continue to feel its vivid presence, and it's called a phantom limb. Some years ago, nearly 15 years ago, we had a patient with a left arm amputated, and we made a specific prediction based on work on monkeys done by Mike Merzenik and others. So nobody had tested it on humans. So we had a patient sitting in my lab whose left arm had been amputated. We blindfolded him and simply took a Q-tip and touched different parts of his body. And asked him, "What do you feel?" He said, "It's my right shoulder, it's my chest." So here's a patient sitting in the chair, blindfolded, took a Q-tip, touched different parts of his body, did a routine sensory neurological exam. "What's that?" "That's a Q-tip." "Where are you touching?" Right chest." "It's my right shoulder, my left shoulder, left upper arm." "Oh my God, you're touching my left phantom thumb." "That's my phantom pinky. That's my phantom index finger." We found there's a complete map of the missing arm on the face, and you can actually plot receptor fields. Right? You can plot receptor fields. Like the thumb is there, ball of the thumb, index finger, pinky. You can send him home, bring him back after a month, and it's exactly the same. And there's no way you could have memorized that. And why is this happening? Well, we can do a bit of detective work. Go back to the Penfield map. Notice that the map is completely, as a map should be, continuous, except for one fact. The face is not near the head where it's supposed to be, near the neck. It's below the hand. Is that clear? Right? So we said what's going on is when you amputate the arm, the sensory signals don't get to the hand area in the brain. Signals from the face skin, which normally go only to the face area, invade and cross-innervate the territory vacated by the missing hand. Right? So there's this cross-wiring. You remove the arm and the hand, there's no signals coming to this region of the brain, the hand region. So that region is hungry for new sensory input. So the sensory input coming from the face skin to the face area invades the territory corresponding to the missing hand, activates those cells, and those cells then misinterpret the signals as coming from the missing phantom hand. So when you touch the face, he thinks you're touching his hand. Right? So you can have fun with this. We took a Q-tip and put it in ice cold water, put it on his face, and he said, "Oh my God, my thumb feels ice cold, doctor." So the reorganization is modality specific. It's not higgledy-piggledy. Touch goes to touch, warmth goes to warmth, cold goes to cold. On one occasion, the water started trickling down his face accidentally. And he said, "Oh my God, I can feel the trickle of the water." And he took his other normal hand and followed the trickle. It's coming down here, it's coming down here. It stops here at the wrist where the water stopped. So it's exquisitely precise, the reorganization. So just for fun, I said, raise your stump and point to the ceiling. So the phantom is pointing to the ceiling upward. Then I put the water here, started trickling down. I said, what do you feel? He said, oh my God, the water is trickling upwards, defying the laws of gravity. And you listen to patients often enough, you realize that they don't make up stories like that. Okay? All right, I can continue along these. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip a lot of stuff. You can do brain imaging and show that the reorganization has indeed occurred. Now, the other interesting thing about phantom limbs is patients can often move the phantom. Majority of patients can move the phantom, but about a third of them, the phantom is fixed or immobilized, and often in a painful position. The patient will mimic the phantom position with his normal hand. He'll say, it's like this, doctor. And like occupying, it's like this. My hand is extending, hyper-extending, so the knuckles are touching the back of my wrist. It's anatomically impossible, but my hand is doing it, and it's like, that movie. What is the movie? Where the head spins around. So so it's anatomically impossible, and it's excruciatingly painful. I wish I could straighten my wrist, and the pain will go away. So why don't you try? He said, I'm trying, I'm sweating, I can't do it. Then I hit on the idea, I'm going to cut a long story short, hit on the idea of putting a mirror there and showing him the reflection of the mirror. We can go into details during question and answer later. Put a mirror inside a cardboard box, and the phantom is a clenched phantom. Often he'll say the fingers are biting into the nails are biting into the palm, doctor, and it's excruciatingly painful. There's no nail, there's no palm, there's no hand. It's a phantom, right? In the serious clinical problem, become profoundly depressed, lose their jobs. On occasion, they contemplate suicide. So you put a mirror there, and you have the patient clench the normal hand, and look at the reflection of the normal hand in the mirror, so that the reflection of the normal hand is superimposed optically on the phantom hand, so you visually resurrected the phantom. And then you say, okay, send symmetrical commands to both hands to open or close. He says, I know you're telling me that I can't do that. My left hand will not open. I said, just take a look in the mirror and see. He said, oh my God, it looks like it's opening. And my God, it also feels like it's opening. It doesn't merely look like it's opening, which is not surprising. It's optics. But it feels like it's opening. And the clenching spasm is removed, is gone. The pain is gone. And then I said, remove the mirror, and then try with your eyes closed. Imagine it. No, it doesn't work. I keep trying that. It doesn't work. Put the mirror in there. Wow, it's opening. It feels good, right? So I said, well, maybe if you use it, you can't carry around a mirror all the time. Maybe you get to a point where you practice with the mirror 1 hour a day, and after about a week or two or a month, you can dispense with the mirror. You can just move it on its own. And you can just unclench it whenever he wants to. So I sent him home with the box, only $2. Sent him home with the box. And then after 2 weeks, I phoned him up and I said, have you been practicing? He said, yes, I've been practicing. When I keep my eyes open, the pain gets relieved for about an hour, and then it comes back with a vengeance. And I had to put the mirror back, and then it goes back again. So I had to keep doing refills. And I know you wanted to go away permanently, but it doesn't. I said, fine, c'est la vie, Then after a week, he phones me, and he's all agitated on the phone. I said, what's wrong, Derek? He said, oh, no, you're not going to believe this. I said, what? It's gone, he says. I said, what's gone? I thought maybe the box is gone. He said, no, not the box. The phantom limb, which I've had for the last 13 years. That phantom limb is gone. It's disappeared. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's gone. And I said, when? Like 3 days ago. I've been trying to reach you. And I was a bit worried about this because of human subjects and ethics, because I permanently modified this guy's body image, if what he's saying is true. Then I said, well, does it bother you? He said, no. And the pains I had in my phantom elbow and my phantom wrist and my phantom fingers, I've never had those pains in the last 3 days because I don't have a phantom, right? Now you can go into the question of why this happens later, but clinically, this has been tried in several clinical trials, one in New England Journal of Medicine. It's how you can see published in New England Journal of Medicine from Walter Reed. You can see with the mirror condition, the pain drops to almost no pain. With the covered mirror and imagery, visual imagery, the pain actually goes up until they crossed over, and then the pain drops again with the mirror. And now it's widely used in clinics throughout the world. Now, it's surprising, curing pain in a phantom limb with a mirror is surprising enough. And I should say there's a lot of variability. Only about half the patients are helped. And about half of them, the mirror does nothing. Typically, patients who see it after a long time. These variables need to be studied. There's another disorder which I want to tell you about, speaking of mind and body, and Lakoff here has done more than anybody else to talk about links between mind and body. But here is a powerful example you see in the clinic. Ordinarily, we think of pain as one thing, but there are in fact two kinds of pain. There's chronic pain and acute pain. Acute pain, you touch a kettle and you withdraw to prevent further tissue injury, obvious adaptive value. Chronic pain is the opposite. You immobilize the arm. You get a tiny metacarpal bone fracture, and your finger becomes painful, immobilized. There's a reflex immobilization to prevent further injury to the finger. And it gets swollen, and it gets inflamed, and it gets warm, and it gets red. All signs of inflammation: swollen, warm, red, painful, and inflamed. And then the bone heals after 2 weeks. All the changes reverse. Inflammation subsides, pain goes away, the finger starts moving again. That's normal, 99% of people. In about 1 or 2% of people, that does not happen. The injury heals, the bone heals in X-ray, but the pain persists with a vengeance. It continues to be immobilized, paralyzed. It gets swollen, it gets warm, right? Not only that, it spreads to the entire hand. Entire hand gets warm, swollen, painful, and immobilized, paralyzed. Entire arm gets paralyzed, swollen, immobilized, starting from the little metacarpal bone fracture. So what's going on here? I don't know. We still don't know. But one thing is the paralysis, I think, is partly due to what we call learned paralysis. Every time he attempted to move the finger, move the arm, the brain was sending him a signal, ouch, it's painful, stop moving it. So there's a Hebbian link between the very attempt to move the hand and the excruciating pain. So the brain just gives up and says, stop moving your hand. So you get this pseudo-paralysis arising from punishment. So we said, how do you cure this? Well, let's put a mirror here, of course, and put the other hand there, and then send symmetrical command. He's going to get visual illusion that the paralyzed, swollen, painful hand is actually moving with impunity. But he's not actually moving it. It's an optical twin that's moving. He's seeing the reflection of the normal hand moving. But will that unlearn the learned pain phenomenon? Well, this is a wild hunch, even by my standards. And we were setting up to do it. Fortunately, another group did it, Halligan and Marshall and Wall in England. And that shows you an example of RSD. They did a similar experiment with the mirrors and found dramatic recovery. In fact, what's astonishing is, when you put the mirror there, here's a guy for months, his arm has been swollen and paralyzed and inflamed and painful. He moves a normal hand. In a few minutes, the inflammation starts, not only the pain, but the mobility returns, and the swelling starts subsiding, and the temperature starts falling. You can't fake a fall in temperature, right? So that convinced me that it was real. And then when I saw one of the authors was Patrick Wall, who's the world's leading expert on pain. And he's an expert on placebos as well. So his name was on the paper, so I figured this must be a real phenomenon. Since then there have been about 4 or 5 controlled studies, double-blind controlled studies, placebo-controlled studies. Also, now it's the accepted first line of approach treating RSD in clinics around the world. And it's an extraordinary example to me of mind-body interaction, where a mirror is producing changes in vasculature, changes in sympathetic pain, changes in swelling, all of that, and temperature and all of that, even online. It's also being used for stroke, by the way, now, mirror rehab, and also for neglect, which I won't go into now because of lack of time. Now, just when I thought I'm done with phantom limbs, I came across another phenomenon. I started reading Rizzolati's work on mirror neurons. I speculated on this, and I jumped off my seat when I first heard the talk. Everybody here knows about mirror neurons, especially here in Berkeley. The neurons in the front of the brain, prefrontal cortex, roughly homologous to Broca's area, V5. These neurons normally are the garden variety motor command neurons, which when a monkey or person reaches out and grabs a peanut, the neuron fires, orchestrating that series of motor twitches required for grabbing the peanut. Now, about 10% of the neurons, Rizzolati found, will also fire when I watch George here reaching out and grabbing a peanut. So they've been quickly dubbed monkey see, monkey do neuron, or mirror neurons. Okay? So they're sort of simulating, doing a virtual reality simulation of your impending action is the claim. Right? Now, there's also sensory mirror neurons. They're equally interesting, discovered by Christian Kaiser in S2, the sensory cortex. Remember I showed you that map of the sensory areas of the brain, skin. Okay, when you touch my left hand, right somatosensory cortex, S1 and S2 cells are activated, and there's a map. This has been known for a long time, since Lord Adrian. Goes back 7,500 years. Now, a subset of these neurons, about 10% of them, will react to my watching George's thumb being touched. Now, so this is very interesting because we can call them empathy neurons, because the neuron is effectively saying what's happening to George is similar to what would happen to you if your thumb were touched. So empathize with George. You know what it's like to feel his touch. Same thing with pain. If you go to the anterior cingulate, there are neurons sensitive to pain. If you poke my thumb with a needle, it goes to my anterior cingulate and I say, ouch. But if you poke George's thumb with a needle, a subset of the same neurons fire, and I can empathize with George. But here's an interesting question. Why don't I shout ouch when he's poked with a needle? The same neurons are firing. Why don't I withdraw my hand and I simply watch George's hand being poked? Right? A couple of possibilities. One possibility, obvious possibility, is I've got my normal skin sending a veto signal saying, don't worry, you're not actually being poked. Empathize with George by all means, but don't dissolve into him. don't withdraw your hand suddenly because it's maladaptive. Be waste of time, right? So empathize with him. Know what it's like to be George in George's shoes right now, but don't withdraw your hand. That would be foolish. So I looked at this and I said, well, the obvious prediction is if I amputate my arm and look at George being poked, I should feel the pain in my phantom because the afferent signals have gone. There's no veto signal. Is that clear or obscure? Okay, so in the 100 years that we've known about phantom limb, nobody had asked this question. That if you poke somebody with a needle while a phantom limb patient is watching, does he feel the poke in his phantom? The answer is yes. We've seen in 3 patients now, and they watch another patient being poked, they feel the pain in the phantom. Okay? So we call these empathy neurons or Gandhi neurons. Okay. Now, there's some debate about whether mirror neurons are significant, whether they're important, whether they're the same as theory of other minds, action understanding, action production, all of this is it old-fashioned psychology with new words to describe empathy and things like that. We won't go into that. This patient went home and he had a smart idea. We talked about this before he went home. He feels excruciating phantom pain in his phantom arm, phantom cramping pain. He can't do anything about it. We're getting ready to start him on the mirror protocol. Before that, he simply watched his wife's hand being massaged. And of course, he felt a phantom massage in his phantom hand, he claimed. This immediately relieved the phantom pain. This is not, unlike the mirror procedure, this has not been tested in clinics, in a clinical setting, using placebo controls. But if it works, it'll be a clear example of a practical application of the idea of mirror neurons, leaving aside all the arcane theoretical debates about how significant they are. Practical in the clinic to alleviate phantom pain. That guy doesn't care, whether it's theory of the minds or what it is. His pain goes away. Now, another prediction we made, this is kind of cute actually, going back to the motor mirror neurons. There's a condition called OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And one particular variation, which is particularly troubling to the patient, is a hand washing, ritual hand washing. You accidentally touch a doorknob, this even minor contamination elicits this acute anxiety, almost panic. The guys incessantly wash their hands to the point of erosion of the hand, fingers and skin. And then we said, well, what if he simply watches another guy washing his hand? Sounds stupid. Some of my best experiments begin as jokes, by the way. So I said, what if he watches somebody else? There's an experiment done with Balan Jalal, a student in my lab. So sure enough, in about 2/3 of the patients we've seen with OCD traits, hand washing compulsions, they watch another person washing his hands, they get relief. And the interesting thing about this is it can't be response bias because they're surprised by it. That how the hell, why should him washing his hand produce relief in me? It doesn't make any sense. They express surprise. So I think we're onto something as a potential treatment for OCD, because you could have an app that shows you, so as soon as you get the urge, you look at yourself washing your own hand. You don't have to actually go to the toilet and spend half an hour, right? So another example of a clinical application for something like OCD. It's a topic that I know very little about, by the way. I'd like to switch gears now and talk about a phenomenon of which we call synesthesia, which was documented first by Francis Galton in the 19th century, first cousin of Charles Darwin. He noticed some otherwise normal people in the population, general population. He thought it was rare, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 500. Now we know 1 in 50 people have synesthesia. So this condition is one where a person who's otherwise completely normal, whenever he sees a printed number on a white sheet of paper, like 5 is red, 6 is blue, 7 is green, 8 is chartreuse, 9 is indigo, and so on and so forth. And the color remains constant for any particular individuals over years, stable over years. But it's different for different people. It's not the same color for different people. Although there are trends, we can get to that if you want. Now, since the discovery of synesthesia by Galton, There have been hundreds of case reports, but no attempt to understand what's going on in the brain or what causes it. And in fact, people brushed it aside. It's a classic example of an anomaly in science, a Kuhnian anomaly, which people brush under the carpet and say, it doesn't make any sense. What do you mean 5 is red, 6 is blue? It doesn't make any sense. Well, often anomalies can pave the way to new discovery and new areas of research. So we thought, well, why not study these people? And the standard explanations of synesthesia, by the way, one explanation is these are just, they're just crazy. That's not an explanation. Even if it's true, let's put that aside for a time being. You can come back to it as a last resort. Second explanation is they are high on drugs. And sure enough, it's about 7 times more common in Berkeley than at UCSD. But leaving that aside, the fact that drugs influence synesthesia is not evidence against synesthesia being a legitimate phenomenon. It makes it more interesting. Why would some drugs enhance this propensity to see numbers as colored? The third explanation is they're just childhood memories. They've been playing with refrigerator magnets, and 5 was red, and 6 was green, and 7 was blue, and 8 was yellow, and so on and so forth. This doesn't make any sense to me, because why does it run in families? Galton himself showed that synesthesia runs in families, possibly in a Mendelian fashion. So it's inherited, right? So you have to say the same magnets are being passed down from generation to generation, which didn't make much sense, but you have to keep in mind as a possibility. And then if it's true, if it's just magnets, why don't we all have synesthesia? Why only a subset? Right? So obvious questions. The fourth possibility is more ingenious but a bit vague, along the lines that George and I have been thinking. I'm not saying you're vague, but I'm vague. That is that maybe they're being metaphorical when they say 5 is green. Maybe it's like, or say F sharp is blue. It's like saying cheddar cheese is sharp. The cheese isn't sharp. You rub it on your skin, it's soft. You say, no, its taste is sharp. But there's a circularity there. Why do you use a gustatory metaphor, a tactile metaphor, to describe a gustatory sensation? There's a whole area of research that this leads to, which we don't have time to go into. So, but this may be on the right track, as you'll see. This is what I'm going to argue. So first of all, are they crazy? Well, we did a number of experiments to show that they're not. That it's a legitimate phenomenon. And in a subset of synesthetes, it turns out there are 2 kinds of synesthetes, the projectors and the associators. Projectors is a minority, maybe about 10 to 15% synesthetes, and we stumbled on 2 of them, luckily, when we started doing research on synesthesia. The associators are more difficult to study. They constitute 80 to 90% of them. So let's talk about projectors. So we said, how do you know they're not making it up? Well, we designed this display where you've got a synesthete who sees numbers as colored. So we show normal people this panel of 5s. There's some 2s scattered among them. Can you find the 2s? One there, one there, one there. And they form a shape, either a square or a triangle or a circle. And it takes ages. It takes 20, 30 seconds before you spot the upside down triangle. A synesthete looking at it sees it much faster. He says, oh, I see an upside down red triangle. If you're a projector synesthete. Now, if he's crazy, how come he's better at it than us? Okay? This has been confirmed by Jamie Ward, by the way, in London, in a larger group of. This is an experiment done together with Ed Hubbard, who used to be a student here at Berkeley before he joined me as a grad student. Now, also just phenomenology. I mean, you talk to these patients. For example, a patient is not patient, subject. Sorry about that. A synesthete I saw recently. So A is blue, and I said, do you see the blue in your mind's eye? Like when you think of Cinderella, you think of a pumpkin, or you think of a chariot, or do you literally see it blue? And she said, no, I actually see it blue. It's not like Cinderella and the pumpkin, because there I can think of Cinderella and her gown, Cinderella and mice, whereas here I can only think of blue. It's an irresistible urge to see it blue. And not only that, in my case, it spills out of the color, spills out of the letter. It forms a halo, a dusty halo around it. Why would that be? The first thing I did was simply put an amoeba around it, and the halo gets blocked, spread of the halo gets blocked by the amoeba. These kinds of phenomena you can't explain in terms of vague psychological associations. It suggests strongly that it's a sensory in character. You can even put an illusory contour around the A, and it gets blocked by the illusory contour. And we can get back to where that's happening in a minute. So what's happening in synesthesia? Where is it? What's going on? Remember, it runs in families. That's one clue. It also turns out synesthesia is 7 or 8 times more common among artists, poets, and novelists, other creative people, than in the normal population. That's another piece of the puzzle. So you've got all these pieces of the puzzle. Why is it 8 times more common among novels, poets, and artists? Why? We'll see in a minute. And in the subset of synesthetes whom we call projectors, we stumbled on, The anatomy is straightforward. Ed Hubbard and I were looking at brain atlases. And we saw that the area for numbers, shown in the red, discovered by Stanislaus Dehaene and Tim Rickard in our lab, in our department, shows where graphemes are represented, including numerals. And the green patch is Semir Zeki's V4. He's involved in processing color. We said, what's the likelihood the most common type of synesthesia is number color synesthesia? And these two are right next to each other in the fusiform gyrus of the brain. Well, we said it's very unlikely to be a coincidence. Maybe there is some accidental cross-wiring between number and color. So every time they see a black and white number, it activates a number node, and cross-activates a color node spontaneously, so they see a particular color. Now, why would there be cross-activation of this kind in these people? And remember that the clue comes from the fact that it runs in families. Remember that in the fetus, in early embryology and early childhood, perhaps, everything is connected to everything. That's an overstatement, but the tremendous redundancy of connections. And then these excess connections are pruned away by pruning genes to create the modular architecture that characterizes the adult brain, including number area and color area. So if these pruning genes are mutated, this defective pruning, then some redundant connections are going to be left behind. For example, if the mutant pruning gene is selectively expressed by transcription factors in the fusiform gyrus alone, you get this quirky number color synesthesia. Now, what about the higher synesthetes, where it's not just the number that produces, visual appearance of the number that produces, the so-called associators? What about them? Well, we did a simple experiment on these people, in the projectors. We asked a very simple question, which had not been asked about synesthetes since the 100 years we've known about it, since Galton's time. Instead of showing him a 5, what do we show him? A V, a Roman 5. Instead of showing them an Arabic 6 or an Arabic 7, I should call them Indian, by the way. But instead of showing an Arabic number, or if you show them a Roman 5, what do they see? Do they see a color? The answer is, I've never met a synesthete who sees a color in a Roman number. So it's not the concept of the number that creates a color, it's the visual appearance, which fits the idea that the fusiform gyrus encodes the visual appearance, not the high-level concept of numerosity, ordinality, cardinality, and all that good stuff. Which, by the way, I think happens in the angular gyrus, in the vicinity, because it's been long known that the angular gyrus, the left angular gyrus is damaged. You get dyscalculias. If you ask him to subtract 17 from 21, he'll say, oh, it's 14. He'll glibly say it's 14 and assert that he knows it for certain. But that's another whole, dyscalculia is another whole lecture. So I think in the projector synesthetes, the cross-wiring gene is expressed here, the cross-wiring gene, so you get number color synesthesia. In the associator synesthete, it's expressed higher up, so that the idea of sequence is mapped onto higher color areas in the brain, in the color processing hierarchy. So if it's expressed higher up, I can show you a diagram later. In the vicinity of the angular gyrus, you get higher synesthetes or lower synesthetes, which would explain why some of these higher synesthetes also experience not only numbers as colored, but days of the week as colored. Monday is red, Tuesday is blue, Wednesday is chartreuse, and months of the year is colored. Again, it seems completely, utterly incomprehensible. What do they all have in common? Months of the year, days of the week, and numbers. Sequence. So I think the angular gyrus is where the action is. And now there's some research using DT imaging by Rumke Holt in our lab, and she's visiting our lab. She has shown that, in fact, if you do DT imaging, there's more white matter in the vicinity of the angular gyrus and associators, and in the fusiform gyrus in the projectors. But this is still very preliminary. I should add a note of warning. Okay, here's another fun example how we can play games with these people. How many of you can read that? Raise your hand. Very tough. Now squint your eyes. George, you can't read it yet? Remove your glasses. Okay. All right, now, guess what happens when you show this to a projector synesthete? The projector synesthete says, oh, I see a jumble of colors, but I don't know why, because they know I can't see any letters. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, I know why that's red. It's an N. And it's an O, that's why it's blue. S, E, O, I see, ha, ha, ha. Okay, so they're seeing the colors being activated by these hidden numbers before they reach consciousness and register as graphemes. Sort of blind sight for numerals and synesthetes. So what I'm claiming is, in these individuals, those hidden numbers are activating the color area in the brain. Before that, and then they're evoking the appropriate, hidden numbers evoking the number area in the brain, activating the number area, evoking the appropriate color even before the message is sent higher up to be recognized as a valid grapheme. So you're seeing the colors and using the colors to infer what the grapheme is. The most striking example of this I've seen is two colorblind synesthetes. Sounds like an oxymoron. This person could see a limited range of colors because of deficient cone pigments in the eye, limited range of colors in the external world. But when they saw numbers, they would see colors which you could never see in the external world. They call them, charmingly refer to them as Martian colors, right? And the reason again, and we've seen two patients like this, the reason again is because the cone pigments are deficient, so they can't see colors in the real world, or see only limited range. When you saw a number, the number activates a number node, and cross-activates color neurons, which can't experience those colors in the real world because the retinal receptors don't exist. But it's hardwired for seeing quote-unquote Martian colors. Is that clear? This again eliminates any possibility of learning being the basis of synesthesia. How can you learn a color you've never seen? Another phenomenon Galton, the astute Galton noticed, was what he called number lines. When I ask any one of you to imagine numbers in front of you, 1 to 10, you roughly imagine crudely going left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's very vague. It's nothing very clear. But in some individuals, Galton noticed, and again we find it's about 1 in 50 to 1 in 100, we'll see a vivid three-dimensional layout of numbers in the visual field. There's a 1 is here, 2 is here, and it's convoluted. It's not straight line left to right. It's convoluted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and often doubles back on itself like this. So 15 may be close to 2 instead of being close to 16 or 14 in Cartesian space. And this has been ignored for 100 years. And Ed Hubbard and I and David Brang did some experiments to establish that the people they were not faking it. We used the number distance effect. I don't have time to go into it. To show they're not faking it, that the number line affects the reaction time to numbers. Since then, there have been mixed results on this phenomenon. But question is, everybody agrees it's a valid phenomenon. The question is, why does it arise? Why would some people see numbers? When you imagine numbers like, I mean, again, it's an classic example of an anomaly in science. And people ignored it for that reason. Well, I don't know the answer to why they see it this way, unlike the grapheme color synesthesia where I had a clear answer. But one thing I can think of is arithmetic and numbers and mathematics is a recent invention in human evolution, maybe 5,000, 10,000 years old. And the brain can't invent a completely new algorithm from scratch to handle numbers, ordinality, sequence, and all of that. So what it does is it adopts a trick using pre-existing maps in the brain. Maps go back to Devonian times, fish-like ancestors. Brain is full of maps. So you map on the concept of numerical sequence, ordinality and cardinality and quantity, onto a spatial map to create a graph. If something goes awry with this remapping of this concept of sequence onto a spatial map, you get these peculiar number lines. Now, how do you test this idea? I have no idea. Okay? But it's an interesting idea nonetheless. Now, some of these people also have, I'm almost done, some of these individuals, and we've studied a number of these, David Brang has studied them in our lab, have what we call calendar lines. Here's a woman we studied recently. And when I ask any one of you to imagine a calendar in front of you, typically most people imagine a rectangular calendar, like a real calendar, January, February, March, and then, so on and so forth. It's very vague, it's nothing very clear. It's in your mind's eye. These people see a very clearly laid out, three-dimensionally laid out calendar, always circular, never rectangular, and never in the coronal plane, but in the transverse plane, like a hula hoop going through their chest. But January, February, March, April, May, the current month always occupies the current the ego of the calendar. You see this repeatedly in different subjects. And here's an interesting part which George would like. You can do interesting experiments on them, like what if you tilt their head like this? Does the calendar tilt? Answer is no, it stays like a water level where it is. But here's the best part. If you ask them to rotate their head like this, what happens to the calendar? So the calendar is here like a hula hoop. Rotate their head like that to the right. What happens to the calendar? The calendar in this particular case remained attached to the head. Sorry, attached to the body. It's in sort of, put it crudely, body-centered, not head-centered. But the exciting thing is, she noticed that the left side of the calendar became fuzzy when she rotated her head. Like a real physical calendar. Why the hell would a mental calendar behave like a physical calendar? And she said also she organizes her life, her time and space, and her calendar. Using this calendar, it helps her organize her otherwise chaotic and meaningless life. And then she looks back and she looks on the other side, the opposite happens. So she can inspect her, use this mental calendar to organize her daily activities and her future, project herself into the future. It's surely a vital part of what you call the self. And not only that, here's something we're testing currently. If she does this, she has memories, episodic memories, of events that happen in January and February become fuzzy. And she has to look there to retrieve the memories. This is an undergraduate student. I don't think she's read Lakoff's book, so I don't think she's making it up. But we don't know yet for sure. We're testing her. A lovely example of embodied cognition where neck muscles are gating access to memories, episodic memories. Now, where is it happening? So this is what we always do. We look at a peculiar phenomenon, nail it down, show what's going on, show it's a real phenomenon, the patient's not making it up, and try and figure out what's going on in the brain, and if possible, cure it if it requires curing. What's going on in the brain? Well, I said the angular gyrus must play a critical role in sequence. So I think it plays a critical role in calendars. This can be tested. But then what about the hippocampus? It's got place cells. It's got two kinds of cells involved in spatial and temporal labeling of events, right? And now it turns out, and we're looking at atlases, there are direct connections between the angular gyrus and the hippocampus, the inferior longitudinal fasciculus. Right, and that's shown in the next slide. So I'm claiming that the human mental calendar, which we take for granted, we use for organizing our lives, and life will be completely meaningless. People usually attribute to the frontal structures. In the frontal structure, are only involved in paying attention to specific regions in the calendar. Calendar itself is constructed by interactions between the left angular gyrus and the hippocampus. Okay, I'll just conclude there by saying that all of these problems which are tangentially related to the problem of self, how you construct a body image, how you feel anchored inside your body, embodied cognition, projecting yourself into the future, and creating a calendar around which your life revolves. These are problems which are considered intractable, but we can sort of begin to at least scratch the surface. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Eric. So I have a question about synesthesia.
Sure.
You mentioned that synesthesia runs in families, so there's a genetic factor. In your studies, did you notice that the same synesthesia, the color number synesthesia, is hereditary, or is it some kind of like, is it different?
It's a difficult problem statistically because the most common form is number color, or letter color, grapheme color. I think there is a tendency for the same form to be inherited, but it's not been. Only thing we know for sure is if you have one type of synesthesia, you're much more likely to have another unrelated type of synesthesia as well. It supports my defective pruning theory.
Okay.
Because the same transcription factors are expressed in two different regions in the same brain, then you're going to get two unrelated types of synesthesia co-occurring more often than by chance.
Are these like functional areas that are sort of kind of like the functions kind of fused together, or? Well,
to give you an example, the number color synesthetes are often the ones who have the calendar synesthesia. And often the ones who have tone color as well.
Okay.
They don't always have to occur together, but often do, much more often than by chance.
Thank you.
Sure. I didn't mention about creativity, but I can get to that later.
Hi, thanks for a great talk. I wanted to say something, hear a little more about the metaphorical use or the anthropomorphism involved in talking about the neurons in the brain. When you say that an area that normally corresponds to an amputated limb or something, and you say it's starved for stimulation, or it's hungry for something like that. Sure. So what is that describing? Why would an unstimulated area in the brain care whether or not it was stimulated or not? So in what sense is there a causal explanation for saying, rather the cross-wiring sounds a little more plausible than saying, oh, it's hungry or it's starved or stimulation wants to move around?
Well, I was just being loose with the terminology. Sorry. It's a legitimate question.
I forget the name of that syndrome where somebody wants to have an amputation.
Xenomelia.
Xenomelia?
Yeah.
Great. Just the question of ethics in that regard.
But that's why it's not done yet.
Well, but do we mutilate somebody because their heart wants to look differently? That's the kind of issue that has come up, and have you seen some advances in figuring that ethical question out?
I mean, I'm interested in those issues, but it doesn't come up in our case because the patient, no surgeon here will do the amputation.
Got it.
So they have to go as I said, across the border to get it done.
At least in the U.S.
At least in the U.S., yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Hi. Do you have any thoughts of what is going on in schizophrenia, for example? There's some the self is broken or something, I don't know. Maybe do you have some thoughts about it?
I've thought about it, but not enough to say anything intelligent. Yeah. Thank you.
These unexplained thought forms like synesthesia, are they evidence or maybe a feeling of immortality of the soul?
It's a question for George.
Quick question. You didn't want to touch on it in this talk, but just a brief background from you on the ancient civilizations of India, the whole Vedic Tantra, Agama literature. How do you connect it yourself with some of the phenomena that you've talked about today?
Well, as I said, there's the metaphysical issues which have been dealt with in the Vedic literature and Upanishads and in Hebrew literature and indeed Christian literature, which I haven't touched on because I don't have any expertise in that, but I'm very interested in it, obviously. On the other hand, the self is something that I can come to grips with, at least partially, so I focus my attention on that. But I like Schrödinger's quotation from the Upanishads, where he says that the individual selves, human beings, are like windows, which let the light pass through. And there's a central light illuminating the building from inside, which is called Brahman or universal spirit or consciousness or whatever. When the individual dies, the window shuts, but the universal spirit continues shining through other windows. It's a comforting thought, but I don't have any deep thoughts about it.
Thank you.
It's a good question, though.
I wondered if you'd done any research on photophobia, people's feeling pain with regards
Yeah,
to color.
I have a couple of students who have that. We haven't studied it. It's a fascinating question. Okay. But I can't tell you anything about it.
Like whether pains. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi. You just briefly mentioned that you hadn't explored creativity and synesthesia, and I'm just wondering about work done on, I know with music, different composers who are very skilled, who have synesthesia. Yeah, different composers see different colors, like Scriabin and Messiaen. Right. These composers. Has there been any research on like where that happens, or what's the effect that's going on in the brain, and why they each see different colors with sound and all of that?
But we can't get that specific, but I do have a theory about why synesthesia is so much more common among artists, poets, and novelists, and why it promotes artistic talent. The reason is, I think, that the same gene that's expressed selectively in fusiform gyrus or an angular gyrus producing these quirky associations of synesthesia, if it's expressed throughout the brain, there's going to be greater cross-connectivity throughout the brain. And if ideas and concepts are also in far-flung regions of the brain, like when you say it is the yeast and Juliet is the sun. You say Juliet is the sun, does that mean she's a glowing ball of fire? You don't say that. You say she's warm, she's nurturing, she's radiant like the sun, she rises in bed like the sun rises in the east. She's the center of my solar system, like the sun is the center of the solar system. You can make as many associations as you want. And these people have excess connections connecting far-flung brain regions, have a greater propensity to link seemingly unrelated ideas. And this is what we call artistic creativity or facility with metaphor. In fact, you could even think of, to put it in phrenological terms, each node has a penumbra of meanings, like Juliet or the sun has a penumbra of meanings associated with it. Because of the excess connections, the penumbras are bigger in the synesthetes. There's greater zones of overlap between two seemingly unrelated ideas, so it makes them more creative. Hence the higher incidence of, and hence, by the way, the high prevalence of synesthesia gene. Why would 1 in 50 people have this quirky ability of linking 5 and red? Because there's a hidden agenda, because the gene makes some outliers in the population more creative and imaginative in general. And the penalty you pay for that is there's a minority who sees 5 as red, but it doesn't do them any harm. So otherwise, there would be no selection pressure to maintain this gene in the population. It would have drifted away a long time ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. But regarding specific details of colors and all that, we haven't studied that. It's a good question.
On the same subject of creativity, I'm coming from linguistics, like literature, and I'm trying to bring new findings of neurolinguistics into how the brain acts and reacts in writing. And I know a little bit about words that has to do with visual and kinesthetic and auditorial, but I wonder if there's something that is written on the subject of the self saying itself in words or not saying, Yeah. Did you write anything about it? Because you said you're
There is a
not
literature dealing with that, but I'm not the right person to ask, but it's a good question. There is a literature pertaining to that, which I can't think of it offhand, but.
Okay, because the last dot there that you said you're not going to discuss is self-awareness. And I wonder if there's some passages there in terms of self-awareness and creativity. No. Okay.
Not that I know of.
I had a question regarding the phantom limb. Did you try using different mirrors like concave and convex mirrors and seeing what kind of effect it would have in removing the pain, or was it just so the types of mirror that you use in the phantom limb experiment? Yes. So
the only thing we've seen is if you use a magnifying mirror,
yes,
the phantom looks bigger. The pain also gets amplified momentarily, fortunately.
So there is a direct correlation in terms of.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not been studied carefully, but.
Okay.
Appears to be, yeah.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Thank you.
So I had a question about the case of Martian colors in correlation with synesthesia. So is there a difference between people who develop color blindness later in life due to macular degeneration or those who are colorblind from birth, so congenital?
We only study the ones who are from birth.
Okay, all right, thanks.
2 of them, but that's a good question.
I have a question about synesthesia. You seem to argue in your talk that synesthesia is more inborn, not learned, but it seems...
Okay.
Or no?
It doesn't make any sense that synesthesia is inborn. You don't learn, you're not born with the letters of the alphabet and numbers.
Right, that's what I was wondering about.
What I meant to say was the propensity to link arbitrary shapes like numbers with colors is inborn in some people. Not that the phenomenon of synesthesia is inborn.
But why would it be always letters and numbers? And why is always like letters or numbers
Because
inherited?
there's a tendency for that region of the fusiform to represent arbitrary shapes. And there are rare cases of synesthesia with faces showing colors. And faces are also in the fusiform gyrus, as Charlie here has shown many years ago, very elegantly.
All right, thank you.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Sure.
2 short questions. One is, you mentioned something about neck muscles and memory at the very end of your talk, and I missed it.
What I meant to say was that here's a person with episodic memories who claims, and we're now testing this rigorously by measuring her repeatedly after a few weeks or a few months, giving her some striking episodes and not telling her about it. But if you go by what she's saying, if she looks to the right, the portion of the calendar, which is on the left, becomes fuzzy, as it would if you did a real calendar. She said the memories of those events become fuzzy too, and hard to dredge up into consciousness until she turns her head and looks directly at the calendar. So it's helping her. So that's what I meant with the neck muscles gating the access to episodic memories. That's the extreme version of the hypothesis.
Okay. Also, what do you think is happening when someone sees someone getting massaged across the room, and let's not use the like anomalous case, let's just say anybody, they see somebody getting massaged, and can they start feeling a little bit better? Or I know you haven't studied that, but like, what do you think is happening?
It seems to me that because of your afferents, you know that you're not being massaged, and that kind of silences it. So I doubt very much you'd experience any benefit from that. But there are a group of people who congenitally have this phenomenon of hyperempathy. It's claimed by Sarah Blakemore. I haven't seen a subject myself, but I trust her judgment. And so what you're saying is true, may be true of a minority of the population, a tiny percent of the population. But in the case of phantom limbs, the majority of the phantom limb patients experience this hyperempathy syndrome because of the deafferentation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question about the soul.
Okay.
Largely because of you, I got invited to the Gifford lectures after you did.
Oh, okay.
And these are the Gifford lectures on natural theology.
Yeah.
And I couldn't resist putting in stuff on the soul. So I said, look, if the soul has to exist after you die, and goes to heaven, etc., or the other place, then it has to, the question is, it has to not have anything that is required by a body. So the question is, what is required by a body? And if it's required by a body, the soul can't have it. So you can study the properties of the soul that way. So can the soul see? No. Can't see, doesn't have a visual cortex, etc. Can the soul hear? Sorry, doesn't have the hearing apparatus for that. Can the soul feel touch? No, doesn't have the appropriate part of the cortex, etc. And you go through this list. Can the soul remember? Doesn't have what is required for memory for that. And so you go through that, and the next question is, does the soul have a personality or your personality? So the question is, does personality depend upon the brain in any way? And this is a question I asked Nina, and who knows much better than I do. And she pointed out that the Phineas Gage phenomenon, would say that, it's lost control. It doesn't have inhibition, et cetera, sort of like Donald Trump or, And, so that's certainly one kind of personality change, but also there could be larger brain injuries that would produce, sort of positive changes of all sort. And if that's the case, then the soul would not have a fixed personality and therefore not your personality. So in what case is it your soul?
Yeah.
But the question about personality is something I really wanted to ask you about, if you've thought about that at all.
Short answer is no, I haven't. But we should chat at length and develop the idea further.
Okay, good.
What's it like for a man like you to be living in what I call Deep South California? It's a strange culture down there that we have no understanding of up here. No, I mean, you've lived down there for how many years?
25, 30 years? 25 years, yeah. And it's very surreal.
Ah. You have a favorite example?
Actually, I have to think about that.